Greetings to all from the capital of the Grand Duchy, and welcome to the 2021 edition of the European Microfinance Week. My name is Guy Benzeno, and I will be your guide during these next 3 days, introducing speakers and announcing upcoming content. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to thank you all for joining us from around the world. We're excited that we have for you over 50 sessions, more than 100 speakers. We will be talking about, among other topics, healthcare for vulnerable populations, efforts to adapt to climate change. We'll be identifying both threats and opportunities of the digital revolution. And indeed, we'll be developing assessment and measurement frameworks to ensure that actions align with words. So, with that said, I will leave you with a word of welcome from the real host of the European Microfinance Week, the man you all know, the Executive Secretary of e-MFP, Mr. Christophe Bausch.
Welcome to European Microfinance Week 2021. Welcome to another very special European Microfinance Week. Yes, I know, when I welcomed you last year, I said that we would meet again in 2021, in person here in Luxembourg after the pandemic, for our traditional conference. But unfortunately, COVID had something against it. COVID numbers are rising again in many parts of the world. Most countries and also many organizations have severe travel restrictions. So because of this, we had to decide to go online again this year. I'm sure you understand our decision. To give you at least a flavor of Luxembourg and to cheer you up a bit, I can send you a spectacular panorama of Luxembourg City from the Casino, the flagship contemporary art institution in Luxembourg, where I am now. This November, we would have liked to share with you an anniversary cake, because it's exactly 15 years ago that 20 visionary and committed microfinance practitioners from around Europe founded here in Luxembourg our European microfinance platform, e-MFP. e-MFP was set up to better share and disseminate ideas and knowledge among its members, to learn from each other, to plan projects and collaborations, to find synergies and to network, and all this with the objective of advancing the microfinance sector. A lot has happened since then. The platform's membership has grown from 20 to over 130, and it is now larger and more diverse than ever. What we do as a platform has evolved alongside the sector, and the scope of our focus has broadened beyond microfinance into the diverse aspects of financial inclusion. The key for this, e-MFP's key, is not to stand still or to be complacent, but to instead make a best effort to look ahead, and most importantly, remain fully open to change. Openness and sharing of knowledge has been the raison d'être of the platform for the first 15 years, and it will remain so for the future. I would like to thank all of our members, partners and funders, as well as e-MFP board members and the team of the Secretariat for the fantastic support of the past 15 years. The e-MFP team is proud of what we have achieved together, and we look forward to continuing this adventure with you in the future. And we will of course enjoy an anniversary cake next time you are all here in Luxembourg. Our European Microfinance Week was from the very beginning and remains the heart and soul of the platform, and I would say that this is probably even more true in difficult years like 2020 and 2021, because now more than ever it's vital to connect and gather together the inclusive finance world to find solutions to the most pressing issues of the sector. In total, there will be more than 50 events in the program of this year's Microfinance Week, and we offer an unprecedentedly diverse program to reflect a sector of growing complexity, facing new and diverse challenges, which requires understanding both the past and the present and a holistic view of financial inclusion in order to discuss the solutions for tomorrow. Our main streams are the renewed relevance of healthcare for vulnerable populations, the continued critical importance of adaptation to climate change, understanding the twin threats and opportunities of the digital revolution, and developing assessment and measurement frameworks to ensure that actions align with words. I'm sure you will find interesting and inspiring sessions and hope that you will use the improved networking facilities, enabling you to connect as you would at our in-person conference. I would like to say a big thank you to our main funders, the Luxembourg Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, Directorate for Development Cooperation, and the Luxembourg Ministry of Finance for their support. And to our sponsors, our corporate sponsors, Credit Suisse and the European Investment Bank, as well as ADA, Arendt, BNP Paribas, CMS, Linklaters, Infine.lu and Tameo. A big thank you goes also to our media partners, Microcapital, FinDev Gateway, FinEquity, Next Billion for spreading the word. I already mentioned the excellent cooperation that we have with the Luxembourg Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, Directorate for Development Cooperation, and I'm extremely happy that its General Coordinator, Mr. Christoph Schilz, has accepted our invitation to give the opening remarks of this conference. I wish you a great European Microfinance Week 2021, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again in person next year here in Luxembourg. In the meantime, stay safe, take care, and enjoy European Microfinance Week 2021.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished experts, on behalf of Luxembourg's Development Corporation, it is my pleasure to welcome you at this year's edition of the European Microfinance Week. Even if it has to take place virtually for the second time already, we are pleased that so many experts and eminent speakers with diverse backgrounds and origins, but sharing the common goal of promoting financial inclusion, are present today. I want to thank our partners Infine and e-MFP for their hard work and for making the European Microfinance Week an exciting event for key stakeholders in the financial inclusion sector. I also want to congratulate e-MFP, a long-standing partner of the Government of Luxembourg, for their 15th anniversary. Together, we have come a long way in furthering our common objectives. Inclusive finance is a key element of our development strategy. For more than 20 years, Luxembourg's Development Corporation has actively supported the microfinance and inclusive finance sectors with the aim of reducing poverty worldwide. Today, Luxembourg is recognized internationally for its progressive, financial, inclusive ecosystem. It is well positioned to contribute to international development through its role as an inclusive finance hub and a leading location for sustainable and impact finance. By leveraging the expertise and potential of our financial centre, we aim to promote sustainable development and inclusive growth. This is why our new strategy on innovative and inclusive finance stresses the importance of mobilising additional resources through public-private partnerships, in addition to Luxembourg's traditionally grants-based financing policy. By increasing the availability and usage of financial services such as credit, insurance or savings, we aim to promote the development of economic opportunities for vulnerable populations, especially women and young people. Reflecting a financial inclusion sector more diverse than ever, this year's European Microfinance Week will cover a range of relevant topics. During the upcoming sessions, we will hear about exciting trends in financial inclusion such as digitalization, the empowerment of women through financial inclusion, agricultural finance, impact measurement, climate change, and, of course, COVID-19 and its consequences for the sector. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's theme, inclusive finance and healthcare, is very timely and relevant. As the pandemic continues to affect our daily lives, we are reminded of the importance of health, not only for people's well-being, but also as a basis for the functioning of our societies and economies. Women are unfortunately still a vulnerable group, among those hit hardest by the pandemic. All over the world, they remain overrepresented in small family farming businesses and other micro-businesses, which were least resilient to the economic shock caused by lockdowns. However, and please forgive me for this little spoiler, all three finalists of the European Microfinance Award have shown one thing very clearly. While women still form an important part of the financially excluded, they are not only a vulnerable group. On the contrary, they play a key role in advancing the development of their communities. Just look at the important role of women in the health sector or in the fight against climate change. With the environmental consequences becoming more and more noticeable in some parts of the world, we have to think further than just slowing climate change down. We have to make sure vulnerable and excluded communities can adapt. In order not to lose the hard-achieved gains of the past years to climate change, in-depth reflections on new ways to address these challenges are necessary. How do we avoid that precarious households fall back into poverty due to the climate crisis? As you can see, expectations are high, and so are the remaining challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at this year's agenda, I'm pleased to see that you will be able to discuss all of these challenges. In that sense, I wish you a fruitful European Microfinance Week with in-depth discussions. As the Luxembourg Development Corporation, we look forward to welcoming you again in person in Luxembourg for next year's edition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Schiltz. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker. 1 billion women globally lack access to financial products and services, making women's economic empowerment a key prerequisite for achieving gender equality. Our keynote speaker is the president of Fondation WW Colombia, an organization that works to close the inequality gaps for women and promote their active participation in economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mrs. Daniela Konietzko.
The story that brings me here today is like that of many women who almost 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic are bearing the brunt of the economic, social, and environmental stresses. Although they are often the first to respond in times of crisis as decision makers, workers, entrepreneurs, and the caregivers responsible for life and their communities. Despite the daily challenges we face, we continue to move forward, seeking a better future for ourselves and our families. We share the desire for a society with equal conditions for men and for women, contributing to sustainable economic, social, and environmental development. Humanitarian crises caused by natural disasters such as droughts, floods, and other extreme natural phenomena cause higher levels of hunger among the entire population and greater threats to life. However, they also have a greater impact on women because of a significant increase in the various forms of violence against them. They result in higher levels of malnutrition among pregnant women and infants, impede school attendance, increase the burden of unpaid work and care tasks, trigger disputes over land, and in general affect community stability. This is what is currently happening around the globe today. The consequences of COVID-19 have shown that women suffer greater exposure to the virus as they constitute 70% of the workforce in the social and health sector. It has had a much greater economic impact on women than on men, both because some sectors such as commerce, tourism, manufacturing, and paid domestic work depend mostly on women's labor, and because many low-income women rely on subsistence entrepreneurship as a way to earn a living. These types of small businesses, generally in the informal sector and with commercial dynamics, dependent on their neighborhoods and personal sales, experience the economic consequences of this pandemic in a more severe way, as indicated in various reports such as IDB, UN Women, and ECLAC, among others. Low-income women tend to run informal enterprises amidst tight mobility restrictions, and even today face greater challenges with regard to connectivity and leverage in ICT through which to continue their company sales. In Colombia, 2 out of every 10 people do not use online tools at all, and only 47% of the population nationwide have a basic level of internet use limited exclusively to entertainment and communication purposes. These entrepreneurs also had to look for new ways to access business networks and connections. Their possibility for accessing working capital were limited either because they were not part of the system or because they were excluded due to poor credit history. Many women worldwide lost their jobs. Others lost their businesses or were faced with rethinking their business model in order to move forward, thereby affecting their economic autonomy and with it their capacity for agency and negotiation within their household. They assumed a greater burden of caregiving activities, and some of them became victims of escalating gender-based violence. Against this backdrop, it becomes more relevant the role of microfinance and financial inclusion in serving, in particular, low-income individuals in the informal economy and promoting economic autonomy. So this brings me to question, what are we, the institutions that make up this sector, doing? And how can we avoid losing the progress made so far in terms of gender equality? As you well know, microfinance originated from microcredit back in 1970s through a model of low-cost, short-term loans granted to low-income individuals in informal and rural economies to support them in strengthening their productive activities and thus help them escape extreme poverty. At the beginning, only loans were provided, but gradually research results showed that this segment of the population needed more financial services that would allow them both to earn income and accumulate assets, enable consumption, and manage risks as well. Born in India, this model has been adopted by other countries with similar economies. In Latin America, it has been adopted in Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia, among others. Talking about Colombia, and the institution that I represent, Fundación WWB Colombia, was one of the pioneers in opening the microfinance segment in the country. We were established back in 1982 by a group of women leaders of the city of Cali, mainly to provide credit to low-income women entrepreneurs in the city. Fundación dedicated its mission to microfinance activity covering the entire national territory for over 30 years. In 2011, we decided to create Banco W so that this new microfinance regulated entity will continue to support the financial inclusion of the base of the pyramid population, thereby allowing Fundación in an independent and autonomous way to continue to work for women in other areas. So for the last 10 years, we have been working under a mission. We are now focusing on closing inequality gaps for women and promoting their active participation in economic development by enhancing their personal and entrepreneurial skills, on providing quality knowledge through research and analytics, and on making social impact investment with a gender lens. Despite the existence of relevant data on gender gaps, being hyper-connected and having access to first-hand information such as reports, videos, social networks as never before, not many entities are implementing changes or adopting the gender perspective, either because they do not consider it a priority or maybe because they don't understand it well enough. In this growth and consolidation of the microfinance industry, gender remains a structural issue in terms of barriers to access the financial system in general. For example, in Colombia, although this can resound in other countries, despite the fact that women have a better credit repayment behavior than men, and despite the fact that women's credit resources are generally used to produce income, and that they invest 3 times their surpluses in education, health, and nutrition for their families 3 times more than men do, they receive less salaries, less capital in their loans, and these loans are short-term loans. On the other hand, significant progress has been made in development issues, but there are still practices that limit and ignore the challenges women face. In Colombia, 47% of the population living in rural areas is made up of women, and the probability of not having their own economic livelihood is 5 times higher than that of men. Rural women access to resources and productive assets is very precarious. They earn 64 less than men, have few land titles, and spend almost 8 hours a day on domestic and unpaid care work, compared to the 3 hours spent by rural men. So this makes it very difficult to them to access training or resource building processes because they lack the time needed to do so. Addressing gender gaps requires a fundamental change of perspective that focuses on understanding the challenges faced by women, reducing inequality, breaking gender biases, and seeking solutions in accordance with the population's needs. It is not only about bringing financial services and products closer to women. It is about positioning the gender lens as a fundamental factor to effectively reduce inequality gaps, particularly for women. Genuine financial inclusion and financial education with a gender perspective, adapted to realities and contexts, can contribute to improve the economic conditions and autonomy to women, their families, and their environment. These factors can also be used to promote women's access to productive assets, to spaces for active participation in union representation and decision-making, as well as education and health. The current circumstances in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic are setting the global agenda, and men and women in leadership and decision-making positions are not and cannot be exempt from the great challenge of ensuring that the progress made so far in gender equality is not lost. In line with the recommendations of the United Nations, those of us who are involved in participation and advocacy must ensure that the need to incorporate a gender perspective is recognized in all sectors: economy, politics, development, emergency response, microfinance, and education, while taking into account the needs, conditions, or limitation of each of these contexts. And it is this role of advocacy that many people around the world are asking us to play today. Business leaders have a responsibility to speak out on environmental, social, and political issues that are affecting our countries, regardless of whether or not they're a developed country, wealthy, or a stable country. This moment in time determines the need to put all of humanity's efforts into building a better world for an inclusive economic recovery. The world is facing many challenges. As you'll hear in a few minutes, climate change is key among them. And of course, we're still dealing with the pandemic. But as we face these challenges head on, let's do so by fully including women in each and every solution. As my 7 and 50-year-old sons, Luca and Tomas, prepare to go into this world, I will continue to reinforce to them that putting on the gender lens is not about excluding men from the process. It is about working together to include everyone in an equitable spaces and build an economic, social, and environmental sustainable world. Thank you very much.
COP26 has just finished its work in Glasgow. What is the way forward for inclusive finance sector? Could green inclusive finance be part of the answer to ensure social and financial inclusion in the context of climate change? To explore these questions, please join us for today's first plenary session. This plenary is for all professionals and academics interested in green finance and climate change. Impact investors will discuss and react to various scenarios around these issues.
So, welcome to everybody. Just need to be sure you're hearing me. I am live. Yes. So, welcome to everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you today. It's my great honor to open the conference today with such an important plenary. Today, we are going to discuss about how climate change is a key challenge for the full inclusive finance sector, and how inclusive finance stakeholders from public to private can grab the challenge ahead and transform that into an opportunity to transform our society, economy, and finance in a more resilient, green, and sustainable one, particularly for the one that need the most. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel. Let me go full screen. Yes, let me share the screen. Yes. Okay, I'm so pleased to be here with you. We will have a new set of speakers for a new institute, and a mix between public and private that will really allow us to go depth into how we can join forces together. Yeah. Before going into this, so we will have the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility, the IFAD, the BNP Paribas, and the Fondation Grameen Agricole to speak today. Let me please introduce you the topic. So what is the challenge ahead? The challenge ahead is the following. We need to agree and realize the climate change is material. Yeah, it's no more an option. It's there that we want or we don't want. It's here to stay. Yeah, no matter what we do, it will stay here, and unfortunately, get worse. It is affecting everyone. Yeah, no one can hide behind. But it's transversal. If you think about the COVID crisis, yeah, it's like related to breaking bio frontier between human and animals. Yeah, it is affecting the most vulnerable ones, and that's really important for us involved in the inclusive finance sector. It is a social and financial risk, and it's a social and financial risk for instability in the term of society and in terms of financial instability. And of course, it's affecting each financial and economic transaction. It is needed a social, cultural, and economic and financial transformation. If we look actual data, we see that existing finance is not enough. The finance that are allocated for adaptation, that is one of the things that is needed the most for the most excluded population with which inclusive finance is working with, is small. It's just a small percentage of an existing finance is already not enough. And then the other challenge we have ahead is that there are not, working delivery channel to make flow climate finance from upstream till to the one that need the most. We have this big challenge ahead. I would like to show you a couple of things, not to be too much scientific, but to set the scene, to really see where we are. So if you look at the last report of IPCC, it is clear that what's happening is material. It is clear that is caused by humans. It is clear that it is here to stay. We will have an increase in temperature worldwide with a distribution unequal on the full planet. We will also have an increase, and we are having already an increase in extremes. These plots show you how hot extremes are already affecting basically all regions in the world, and how much that is very likely due to the human cause. Extreme increase in hot extreme, increase in heavy precipitation already observed due to the cost of the human, and of course, impact on agriculture and ecological droughts. So this is clearly, if you work with vulnerable population, yeah, is even worse. We've seen an increased cost of causalities. Yeah, so we've been seeing and observing that this kind of extreme translate into increased cost of the causality. And these causality are for more than the 90% due to climatic events. Has been recognized that from the World Economic Forum, yeah, that environmental risk is a financial risk. Yeah, among the highest financial risks that has been highlighted, infectious diseases, climate action failure, biodiversity losses, human environmental damage, and extreme weather are the highest one. When we look about where finance goes, finance for adaptation is clearly among the weakest one. And if you think about, again, to inclusive finance, this is the one that is also needed the most. That's our challenge ahead. There are solutions ahead, and there is a path ahead. We've been just coming out from the COP26. We will heard from the participants. Some of them have been very active into the COP26. What is their take from there? There are some news good and some not so good. Yeah, so we heard what are the new challenge ahead from there. The topic about climate change adaptation has been taken up in particular by new dedicated summit. The Climate Adaptation Summit, the first one, has been up in 2022 by showing that adaptation is becoming higher and higher in the agenda as well. With the main messages that we need to increase up to half and half adaptation and mitigation. And this again, for poor population and for vulnerable population we are working with in the inclusive finance sector will be key if you want to achieve our goal of financial, economic, and social inclusion. There are informal initiatives like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, to disclose climatic risk into financial sector, Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosure, the same for biodiversity and ecosystem, Race to Resilience, Race to Zero, the pledge to reduce to zero emission and to increase resilience of population, that are providing fertile ground to act. Within Yapu solution, we have been working to support that for the particular case for inclusive finance by building on the Race to Resilience and defining together with Gava Capital and SIAT a scale for resilience, to support to have more than 3 million more resilient farmers by 2030, with participating more than 100 MFIs and disbursing more than 5 billion of credits. We have been seeing implementation with United Nations for Environment. We'll be happy again within the Yapu solution to participate to this implementation that are taking up and with partners to show that there are solutions to basically include financial inclusion actor to foster adaptation to climate change. And there is a good response by countries. You see how the impact has been growing, as well as number of MFI involved. In the European Microfinance Platform, I have been having the honor in the last 7 years to guide the Action Group for Green, Inclusive and Climate Smart Finance Action Group with the European Microfinance Platform that has been growing and been joined by a variety of stakeholders, where I'm so pleased that all the speakers here are members of the Action Group today. So that's is a great pleasure to have them here and to have into the group. And I've been working very hard, as you know, in the last couple of years to update our main tool, that is Green 3.0, that allowed to support the financial sector intermediary to assess, their performance in environmental finance, and in particular by including the identification of vulnerability, particularly to climate change, the management of such vulnerability, as well as finding products and services to create resiliencies in a sustainable way into their portfolio and for their client. But all that, unfortunately, is not enough. We are just at the very beginning. Our path forward is huge. So here today, we are here to discuss the following items. How do we respond to the challenge ahead? How to mainstream resilience and sustainable inclusive finance? How to make it grow? How to ensure synergies between public and private to achieve such objective? And what is the way forward for inclusive finance? Again, I'm so pleased to have such a brilliant set of speakers with me. From the Global Environmental Facility, Avril, Janie from the IFAD, Sébastien from the BNP Paribas, and Julie, that is taking the place of Eric, that unfortunately couldn't join at the last minute from the Fondation Grameen Crédit Agricole. So I'm pleased with that to pass the word to Avril for the first speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I didn't bring any slides, so I hope that my 5 minutes intervention mentioning and resuming or making a summary of what the COP26 is basically telling us moving forward will be interesting for all of you, and we will try to respond to all of these very important questions that Davide just mentioned. So I lead at the Global Environment Facility the Blended Finance Program. This Blended Finance Program seeks to bring in private sector investment and help you and corporates, banks, financial institutions to basically invest in the environment in a with a risk-return profile that is acceptable for you. The GEF, the Global Environment Facility, has been around for 30 years. It's also our birthday this year, together with the European Microfinance organization that I believe is the 15th birthday. For us, it's the 30th birthday. And during all of these years, we have been supporting governments and the private sector in investing and protecting the environment. We are the only international multilateral climate fund that looks at the environment in a holistic way. So what I mean by that is that we don't do climate change mitigation on Monday, biodiversity on Tuesday, and on Wednesday and Thursday, we do land degradation or chemicals and waste. What I mean and what we're hearing here, and that let me link that with what the outcomes of the COP were, is that we cannot delink the climate crisis from the nature crisis. These are interlinked. And therefore, when we talk about climate change and all the unfortunate impacts we're having in our environment, is not only a matter of climate, it's a matter of the nature, and it's also a matter of us responding. First of all, reducing the impacts on climate and on nature, and second of all, adapting. So the GEF has, in order to validate a little bit what I'm going to explain forward, we have just some numbers. We have supported more than 5,000 projects with $21 billion over the last 30 years, mobilizing $117 billion. But what's most important of all these numbers is that we're actually very far from even spending this money trying to solve the climate and the nature crisis. We need a shift in the economic system, what we call transition after the COP, and we also need a shift in the economic system for the sake of nature. So the good news of the COP is that, I'm going to start with the good news because it was a bittersweet outcome, is that we're all transitioning, or the net zero targets were improved and enhanced. Most countries, or the most, I would say, important countries in the role of reducing GHGs became more ambitious. And the overall agreement is that they should be transitioning earlier and that the cuts in GHGs should be happening faster. Of course, that was a pledge and a promise, and we're still waiting for compromises that go beyond words. We also saw a very important agreement between China and the US that came bilaterally. Many details are missing on how China and the US will achieve reductions or the net zero numbers that they're seeking for 2040 and 2050. 2060 for China, I believe, if I recall correctly. But the important aspect of it is, first of all, China and the US are collaborating in this very important task. And second, they both represent 40% of global emissions. Finally, I would say that it was very important, the role of the financial industry, led by Mark Carney, what we call the Glasgow Finance Alliance, that announced $100 trillion helping the economies transition to a climate zero or net zero economies. But here we are, and we're talking today about green, inclusive, and resilient economies, and that's most important for the microfinance industry. I happen to work in microfinance in my previous life before I joined the GEF. And what I think you could agree on is that most of the microfinance institutions and the whole industry is aware of a climate risk. When we say climate is here to stay, I was very, I would say 10 years ago, I was very surprised to go to these microfinance industries in institutions in Nicaragua or Colombia or some other Latin American countries and hear firsthand from the CFOs that climate is already something that is affecting their portfolios, but that they don't know how to address this risk, or how not only address this risk, but convert this into an opportunity. So I would argue that 20 years ago, nobody would wake up in the morning and say, we want to have a net zero future or an electric car, or we should all think about how our economic system should transition to net zero. These concepts were very cryptic and unknown for all of us in the industry, and not only in development, but also at the financial institutions point of view. But today, it has become part of what the strategic plans of most banks and also most corporates need to include looking forward, because climate change is here to stay. Nature loss is here, unfortunately, and this is going to affect business models and also the P&L of all of our of all of the companies, the banks, but also microfinance institutions. So going forward, what do we see from the GEF and other players is that we're looking at an integrated approach to solve the environmental crisis. It's not only climate, it's also, as we were mentioning here, resilience and adaptation. Although the numbers of the 5% climate finance directed to adaptation is very low, it's something that we need to bring up at scale. And what we're seeing in all of these projects and all of these experience at the GEF is that it's only a matter of measuring and also definitions. What do we mean by adaptation? What do we mean by increasing resilience? And by that, just responding to the actual threats with types of projects that can deliver in solutions. And you, as the microfinance institutions, then measure how you're helping your clients do so. So on the measurements, on the many challenges that we face in adaptation, measurements is the first one. Second is the access to finance. And third, I would say, is that it's an elusive concept, and that adaptation means something different in each of the countries and each of the geographic areas in each country. So it's very granular when you talk about it. And yet, what I would expect is that 20 years from now, we will wake up in the morning and not only say we are transitioning to net zero, but we are transitioning to a resilient and an overall adaptive society to climate change and nature loss. I would just mention from the GEF, the way we have to support you and support most of our, I would say, private sector clients is that we provide, of course, financing. This is the most important part, but also there's a lot of engagement that we facilitate between governments and the private sector. So on the blended finance specifically, which is the area I lead, and with my colleagues also on the adaptation side, what I can mention is that there is already the willingness from the private sector and mostly financial institutions, I would say, fund managers, asset managers, and banks mostly, to invest in adaptation and resilience. The problem is what I just mentioned before: measurement, unknown concepts, and also unknown risk and return. So what we do at the GEF is provide what we call non-grant instruments. So it's everything but grants, equity, guarantees, subordinated debt, whatever is needed in whichever form is needed to de-risk the investment of these organizations in making their businesses more resilient, and to reduce the impact in the environment. On the other hand, on the adaptation, what we're seeing more and more, and we're engaging directly with businesses and financial institutions and technology providers, is that there is a lot of innovation happening there. There's a lot of faith in the technological solutions that can help the most vulnerable respond to the threats of climate change. Respond and adapt. It's just a matter of, again, framing what we mean by adaptation in each of the projects, measure that, and help the clients become more resilient or increase their adaptive capacity, whatever means in the specific concept. And I think that with that, I would just leave for the next speaker, and just mentioning that indeed climate change and it's just enhancing the message that Davide just said. Climate change is here to stay, but it's not only a climate change problem. It is an environmental problem for all of your clients, all of the societies, all of us at the end of the day. And we need to help support a transition not only to net zero, but to avoid nature loss, to be more prone to biodiversity conservation. And of course, that in turn will help with adaptive capacity and resilience. There is no economic system without nature. There is no economic system without a world in which we can live and breathe and have an environment that we can use in our economic activities to create wealth. So thank you very much, Davide, and I'll be here for the Q&A session.
Thanks a lot, Avril. It was a great pleasure and a great introduction and overall umbrella of what we can do and how we can act. I'm now pleased to pass the word to Janie. Let me go to the full screen again. Voilà. So Janie from IFAD is going to tell us what IFAD, that is focused into financing smallholder and agriculture, is doing and is acting according to the new threat of climate change and what the path ahead. Janie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Davide, and hello everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here in this panel and discussing with you. So I'll have a quick presentation with a couple of slides just to go through a bit what IFAD has done at the COP. So maybe you can change next slide. And great, thank you. So we're just back from the COP. It was very, very busy, very intense 2 weeks. This year, IFAD had a pavilion for the first time where we really had kind of three main objectives there. So the first one was really to mobilize more climate finance for adaptation. As Davide mentioned, there's not enough finance for adaptation. And within that, really, IFAD focus was on the small-scale farmers, bringing attention to the rural communities, to poor people, to women, youth, indigenous people. So we really try to bring this lens of focus. And third was focusing also on what IFAD can bring in terms of leadership for adaptation. We have been implementing an adaptation flagship program since 2012. So we wanted to bring some of that, some of the results and lesson learned to share them. So next slide. So here, just very briefly, in terms of what we were focusing, so really targeting the rural poor, also fragility, innovation and scaling up, because some of the solutions for adaptation are ready to be scaled up. Others are more innovative and need more knowledge, more de-risking funds. So this was also a focus, and engaging the private sector. It was actually many private sector financial institution banks at this COP. And for IFAD, we wanted to also put emphasis on the nexus between climate change, gender, nutrition, and youth. Next slide, please. So here, what's next? So we believe at IFAD that there's a need for stronger leadership on climate adaptation. So we're also, as Avril was mentioning, it's not an isolation. So there's climate change, there's nature loss, but there's also food insecurities. And climate change is a leading cause of global hunger. So it's really adaptation to climate change is essential to achieve the SDGs. So there's different agendas coming together: climate change, the SDGs, biodiversity, nature. So for that, we, as I was mentioning earlier, we're really pushing for an increase in financing for climate change adaptation from different sources, so public and private. So from public, global, of course, but also domestic financing needs to align. So it's not something done in parallel. It's something that have really to be mainstream in different sectors. And from IFAD side, we really want to put emphasis on the climate finance targeting the most vulnerable, and really helping the small-scale producers to adapt. So they are key in producing a large share of the global food, and they're really impacted by climate change. So they need to be supported and adapting. There was also a couple of decision and pledges related to agriculture at this COP that we've been following, and we'll keep this focus. But as you've heard and know, well, there was the Coronivia Joint Work Program on Agriculture that decided to continue its work, focusing on means of implementation. But the detail of that will be discussed at the next COP. There was also a pledge to stop deforestation, to also reduce methane emission. So some of these would, or more on the mitigation side, but at the field level, all of this comes together, and some adaptation solution have also mitigation benefits. So yeah, next slide, please. So on this slide, I just want to show briefly that's the IFAD flagship program on adaptation that we call ASA. So Adaptation Smallholder Agriculture Program that we've been implementing since 2012 in 41 countries. It supported 6 million people to cope with climate change. The financing was 300 million. It also brought more than 1 million hectares of land under climate resilient practices. And as a mitigation co-benefits, it helps sequester over 60 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Next slide. So here, very briefly, I just want to show you some of the climate investments that were done in this program. These are solutions that were, that are proven solution for adaptation benefits and some contexts and some countries and some local contexts, and that are ready to be scaled up. So those were more brought at scale. And if we go to the next slide, we've been also focusing on the bit more innovative elements, how things are done differently to bring in the resilience and low emission into agricultural investments. Next slide. And that brings me to ASA Plus. So based on the success of ASA and the need for more finance to adaptation, to agriculture, especially small scale farmers that are receiving less than 2% of the global climate finance. So we've relaunched the program called now ASA Plus, so Enhance Adaptation Smallholder Agriculture Program, and that contributes to the SDGs and the Paris goal. So we are looking at taking a comprehensive approach to it, so looking at how to address the zero hunger and the climate action goal. So the first outcome is really to increase climate resilience of 10 million vulnerable people and increasing their food security. And the second outcome is on the mitigation benefits to promote win-win solution that will also reduce emissions or increase carbon sequestration, and especially through nature-based solution. So the resource mobilization target is 500 million, and that's ongoing under resource mobilization, and next year we'll start the programming. If we go to next slide. So just quickly how it works. It's blended with the IFAD investments. So that's really the strength of it. It's not implemented standalone at small investment. It's fully blended into larger IFAD investments. And it's focusing on low-income countries, SIDS, debt-distressed countries, countries also that have high food insecurities in some areas, fragilities, and highly exposed to climate change. There will be also technical assistance set aside as part of the program for policy engagement, knowledge management, impact assessment, as we've heard how important measurement is to really show that what is done is contributing to adaptation, as well as GIS, M&E, and other tools for indeed measuring resilience. Next slide. So here, I just want to show very briefly some of the work IFAD is doing on inclusive green financing. So this, we have a bit of a model that we've developed called Igrifin, so inclusive green financing. which one project has been approved with the GCF in Niger, and now we're scaling it up to all the Great Green Wall countries, where dedicated credit lines will be created with public development banks that would on-lend further to microfinance institutions to really reach the small-scale farmers, farmers cooperative, and MSMEs. And that will be both for adaptation as well as mitigation, but always targeting the rural communities, small-scale farmers, small agribusinesses, as well as women groups, youths, and these specific examples that are under preparation. These investments will be through the unlending will be through the government, which will unlend further to the public development banks. As IFAD is operating, but we have also a new private sector facility that would have smaller investments initially to grow their portfolio that will lend directly to private sector and financial institution. So if you go to the next slide. So this is my last slide. I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what's the climate ambition from 2022. So we will start our new phase of programming, IFAD 12, and 40% of it will be targeted for climate finance. So that will be equivalent to 1.4 billion. And that will be, on top of it, we'll have the ASA Plus trust fund dedicated for the nexus of adaptation and food security for 500 million. As I mentioned, we have a newly established private sector facility that will have also some adaptation and related and green investments. And we don't work alone. We work also with the climate environment funds. So we have pipelines of projects that we're developing with countries and that are usually also blended with IFAD investments. So with the GCF, with the GEF, especially with their GEF 8 coming next year, and Adaptation Fund. And we are quite pleased to be collaborating, partnering with the GEF and their Adaptation Challenge program for more for working with private sector on adaptation, and we will be working closely with BNP Paribas and Grameen Crédit Agricole in that context. So we're really looking forward to gaining this new framework and indicators and really helping this work on inclusive green financing. So thank you very much, and happy to take part of the discussion. You can go to my last slide. I'd like to acknowledge also my colleague, Jonathan, from the Rural Finance team that has been involved in the working group. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So let me see if I'm open. Yes, I'm my microphone. So thanks a lot for this. It was very inspirative and many things happening. We can see at the level of the one that need the most. So smallholder. So now that we lend to agriculture and from production, we cannot anymore avoid to look to climate change, but should be integrated to allow this financing. So, and thanks a lot for the explanation of the relation between you and the GEF, and eventually for the relation between the IFAD, the GEF, and the private sector engagement that, as we know, need to get engaged and need to engage if we want to achieve the objective we have for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And with that, I'm pleased to pass the word to Sébastien Soleil from the BNP Paribas, that as probably someone knows, is a private actor banking that is going to tell us about what's the view of private banks after COP26 and a topic about climate change adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity conservation, and what the way forward for the inclusive finance. Sebastian, the floor is yours. Share the screen. I share later the screen. Yeah, please.
Thanks, Davide. So yes, Davide, Avril, and Jenny already shared a few elements of what they saw, what they felt at COP26. So yes, there are several things that really struck me at COP26. The first one is the fact that more than ever before, biodiversity was really put forward during a COP on climate. So it was a COP26 on climate, and we heard of biodiversity everywhere, every time during the COP. So now there is a clear consensus that seems quite obvious, but that was not the case during the previous COPs. There is a consensus on the fact that we cannot fight climate change without preserving and restoring biodiversity, and we cannot preserve biodiversity without fighting climate change. So a deep interrelation between biodiversity and climate change. Another thing that was very important is the importance of local communities. So during the World COP, there was a huge emphasis on local communities, on both on the fact that local communities are quite often the first victims of climate change, and on the fact that local communities can have a key role to play. For instance, in the Amazon, it was very clear that local communities can be the best keepers of the forest over there, and they can be the best, the most relevant people to make sure that deforestation is not in place. So biodiversity, role of local communities. And third point that struck me is the importance of adaptation. So maybe it's not that good news, because actually we see more and more that we will witness climate change. We are already at 1.1 degree of global warming on average. So it's already quite huge. You have already huge impacts of climate change, and we need, and we will need more in the next few years, next few decades, to adapt to climate change. So it's very important, especially in emerging countries, to be able to adapt to climate change. So there was a huge emphasis on adaptation, and it was clear that developed countries need to finance both climate mitigation and climate adaptation in emerging countries. And yes, the share between climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation can be more or less around 50-50. So both. So biodiversity, local communities, and adaptation. So all this is very important and has been very important for BNP for years. BNP Paribas, as a private financial institution, we have been working on climate for at least 1 decade, a little more than that. And on biodiversity, we have been working on biodiversity as well, but not that much before 2 to 3 years. So we have been including biodiversity-related criteria in our financing in investment policies for 1 decade, but the fact getting to realize that biodiversity can raise serious risks for private financial institutions like climate change. It's a fact that is being recognized since not that many years, so 2 to 3 years. And so we have been working quite a lot on biodiversity for 2 to 3 years. So what have we done until now? We have assessed the main impacts of the activities of our clients on biodiversity, and we have implemented several ways to decrease these impacts. And what is very important to assess and decrease these impacts is to realize that one of the biggest impact of the activities of our clients on biodiversity is deforestation. So we have been attacked quite a lot by NGO, especially on the fact that we are financing agro-food actors, agro-food big corporates, and their activities can have negative impacts on biodiversity. So we have to work with these actors, work with our clients to make sure that their activities is not responsible for deforestation. And the most difficult point there is to know their supply chain, actually, because the deforestation does not come really from the core activities of these big agro-food corporates, but the deforestation is related to activities of their suppliers and quite often of small scale farmers. So to be able to decrease the impact of the activities of our client and biodiversity, we have to work more and more on the activities of small scale farmers, and to work on several topics at the same time, which is quite difficult, but we have to do it. So we have to assess the impacts of the whole agro-food supply chain on deforestation, on biodiversity, and we have to be able to work with local communities to help them adapt to climate change and fight deforestation and preserve biodiversity as much as possible. So how can we do it as a private financial institution? So first thing is, there are many things in this field that we don't know very well. So we have to partner with relevant partners. That's why we have been working quite a lot with YAPU, so with Davide inter alia, with YAPU on several projects related to all this. So the first one, the most important ones for us as well, was the MEBA projects and the MEBA biodiversity projects, in which we work to include climate change adaptation and ecosystem conservation into processes, waste management, and products and services of inclusive finance service providers. So the aim was to take into account climate change adaptation and biodiversity into this work. And then in the second project, the aim was to develop tools and trainings on these topics for investors and inclusive finance service providers. And so the final target of all this is to engage as many small scale farmers and local communities into new practices, new or ancient practices, but practices that are more aligned with climate change adaptation and biodiversity preservation. And it can be done through inclusive finance. So we use inclusive finance in relation with awareness raising on climate change adaptation and biodiversity preservation to help these small scale farmers work in a more sustainable way, more aligned with climate change adaptation and biodiversity preservation. So we did these MEBA projects. Then we decided to work on a new project. And one of the most pleasing moments for me at COP was when the JEF announced the winning projects in its climate change adaptation program. Since projects that we propose with MEBA on a certification scheme and climate change adaptation and biodiversity was selected. So this project, proposed with YAPU and with IFAD as a project implementation agency, aims at developing a certification scheme aligned with the MEBA project, a certification scheme to assess the share of inclusive finance portfolios, service providers that are based on climate change adaptation and nature-based solutions. So for us, it's very important to develop such scheme because as a private financial institution, it's very important to be able to measure the impact of what we finance. So having such a certification scheme give us more robustness, help us be more transparent in our discussion with investors, with stakeholders, and we think that it's very important to be able to certify in such a way the share of this portfolio dedicated to climate change adaptation and biodiversity. But we are convinced that it's not enough because we do these projects with the YAPU, we have this project with the IFAD and the GEF. It's good, but there is still a huge financing gap on climate change adaptation and biodiversity preservation. And so we really need and we really want to mainstream what we can do for inclusive finance on these topics. And that's why we are creating with YAPU and with the Fondation Crédit Agricole, Grameen Crédit Agricole, we are creating a new institute. So it will be, it's not a project, it's really an institute, an independent body, the Climate and Biodiversity Inclusive Finance Institute. So aiming at mainstreaming the financing of climate resilience and biodiversity conservation for small-scale producers and rural communities globally. So in this institute, we want to work as collectively as possible with as many partners as possible to develop relevant methodologies, to gather expertise, and to catalyze market development for this kind of finance. So it seems very important for us, to gather many actors that share the same view, that share the same final target, to be able to decrease as much as possible this financing gap on climate resilience and biodiversity conservation. So thank you.
Oops, I was mute. Thanks a lot, Sebastian, for this brilliant introduction and discussion of why climate change is so relevant for a private actor as the BNP Paribas, and why that also is transversal to biodiversity conservation, and the need that we, of course, share to be able to mainstream this, and that we all perceive that there is a missing gap on market development, so that each actor can act, private and public. Yeah. So if someone is interested in what announced by Sebastian and the colleagues from the BNP Paribas, please write us and join us. We are just hearing from you. I'm so pleased then to pass the word to Julie from the Fondation Grameen Crédit Agricole, that now she's going to tell us about how the Fondation, that has been engaged into rural and agri-finance since basically the foundation and as a main core activities, is perceiving the evolution of the sector with the new threat of climate change, and what are you doing? Please, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Davide, and thank you for having the foundation to this plenary session. So that's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss this topic together today. So maybe a few words to start regarding the COP26. The main observation that we had is that microfinance was quite absent in the discussion, while for us, microfinance has a key role in the climate change adaptation, and especially for the most vulnerable in rural areas. So for us, microfinance should be part of the agenda and the solution to the fight against the climate change. So how the foundation is engaged, and what is the vision of the foundation into climate change adaptation? So maybe one simple observation is that the countries that we are operating, where we are operating, and the type of population that we are targeting, are vulnerable, particularly vulnerable to climate change. So almost the half of our portfolio today is located in countries that have been defined as highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So in that context, and with the growing importance of environmental challenges, one of the core missions of the foundation today is to make our partners more resilient to shocks. That is why we ambition to reshape our strategic plan to better account climate change adaptation and to focus on positive impact for rural communities. So for that, we plan a team brainstorming in December, and to prepare this strategic session, we launched the second round of our study conducting among our partners to assess their exposure to environmental risks and to assess as well their own strategy in place towards environmental impacts of their activities. And the main goal behind this survey is really to get a clear mapping of this risk and the strategy in place, and also the gaps that the partners are facing, to better capture their needs and to build an adequate answer. So I will come back maybe a bit later if I have the time to some of the main outcomes of this survey. But first, I would like to highlight some concrete examples on how the foundation is engaged into climate change adaptation. So first, we support through debt or capital social businesses which have environmental projects in different areas, can be in sustainable agriculture, inclusive value chains, agri, microinsurance, or clean water and sanitation. We also have a strong pillar in terms of technical assistance. So we support for now 5 partners, mostly on designing an environmental strategy, but we also have multiple proposals under drafting today, especially in the frame of the SNUP program, which focus especially on promoting green agri practices for smallholders farmers. And as Sebastian mentioned it, we also participate in the MEBA biodiversity project in collaboration with YAPU. The foundation is also participating in different working groups at the sector level, especially the one on the elaboration of the new Green Index 3.0 in the frame of the e-MFP action group. But more recently this year, we also joined an informal coalition gathering other involved players such as BNP, CD, BBVA Microfinance Foundation, Alco-Credits, and YAPU to develop a subset of indicators focused on climate change adaptation and biodiversity conservation to target the most vulnerable, so smallholders, farmers, and producers. And that's a great transition to tell a bit more on the GEF project that the foundation won in collaboration with YAPU. So the title of the project is Indicators and Framework for Climate Change Adaptation and Biodiversity Conservation Finance for Smallholders and Rural Communities, Leveraging Private and Public Finance. So the title is a bit long, but so the main observation that were at the initiation of this project were first that smallholder farmers and rural community are the most vulnerable to climate change. Second, that green financing is too low today in the market, and it doesn't reach the ones that need it the most, meaning small-scale producers and rural communities. And third, there is no systematized approach and nor a recognized metric at the sector level. So the idea, the goal of this project is really to materialize the work that has been done in the context of, in the frame of the coalition that I mentioned just before, and to pilot the indicator subset with four inclusive financial service providers, so FSPs. And the idea then with these pilots is to establish a dedicated financial, technical assistance and technology support product for FSP that are eligible to get more favorable conditions according to the defined framework. And the goal as well is to increase the coordination among public and private sector to be able to propose a concrete and adapted offer to the FSPs. So I will conclude with maybe two main outcomes that I think it's interesting to highlight here from our survey. So almost 90% of the institutions consider today that dealing with environmental risk is part of their social mission. But there is still a lot of progress to be made in terms of different aspects, but especially the board involvement and action taking. And more than 60% of the respondents of this survey have projects for the future in terms of environmental challenges. But they still face many limitations. So it can be financial limitations, but also human resources, expertise, time. It's quite diverse. So we can see from the results of this survey that we still have a lot to do to support our partners. But at the same time, we see that there is already a good ground of initiatives and expertise in the inclusive finance sector. So for us today to move forward, coordination among the sector is key. And that's why the foundation is really pleased and enthusiastic about this new project that Sébastien mentioned, the institute, the project of the institutes, to really develop a relevant system to mainstream financing of climate resilience and ecosystem conservation while focusing on the population in need. So for us, it's really a key strategy to steer market development for climate and biodiversity inclusive finance. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any question.
Cover the part that were missing from the previous. So we're really, I think, quite complete on the various point of view. But you can, so the audience can, of course, ask us question. You can post in the chat. So we'll be very pleased to answer a question from the participants. If you have any, please feel free to shoot to our speakers any kind of question, because this is our challenges, common struggle ahead for the full sector. I will, in the meantime, ask a question because I'm so proud to have you all here. So it's quite a unique set of speakers. So we have here, actor like the Jeff, that is financing implementing agency like the IFAD and other. We have the international institute like the IFAD and others that we were implementing like the UNEP, the United Nations for Environment, so specific key player in the ground. And we have private sector and banking, as well as a foundation dedicated to inclusive finance. So we quite have a sort of the full chain of financing an actor together. So I would like to have a quick round to understand how we can structurally collaborate, how we can make sure that we have a common interest of the sector, cope with climate change, and what is the good alchemy to engage permanently all these kind of actors together, in particular the private and the public one, in such a way that money flow through and really reach the one that we need to reach the most, the vulnerable population. If someone want to bring that forward, because this public-private partnership beyond project, as said, so really structurally, I think is key to achieve any kind of goal. Any taker of this question?
I can start if you allow me. Good. So it's the $1 million question, and that's all that we're here, I'm sure, in the panel, but also in the audience. How do we all collaborate to bring the necessary change at scale? Well, I think the answer needs to be from a multiple layer of stakeholders, not only either from the private sector or from the public. And I would go in two, I would say, main directions. First is what we call policy coherence, but also collaboration between internal ministries of finance and ministries of environment. Unless we have a coherence between what the policies of a single country are doing in financing or subsidizing certain industries versus the impact on the environment. So unless we have the support and the changes in laws and everything that needs to happen, it's very hard to bring this to scale only by the private sector action. And I just want to give a number and data point that for me was an eye-opener. Accenture mentioned that of all the CEOs present at the COP, only 20% thought that they had enough guidance from their governments to make a transition to the zero or the net zero transition, or to be more reliable and I would say aligned with what we are thinking a 1.5 degree world or 2 degrees world would look like. So that is a very low figure, and I think that's part of the coherence that we need to look at, not only from the environment angle, but from the finance and regulator, and have a clear message, and that is mainstream in each country. Of course, that's very complicated to do, but that's what would need to happen for rapid scale up. On the public-private partnerships, beyond what I just mentioned, it is to find how blended finance at the end of the day is a tool, but it's an important tool to show or showcase and build a track record of projects that on the one hand, in the case of adaptation, since there's so little done and we don't have a track record, and we don't know what investing in resilience will actually deliver, which by all means will be a reduction in risk for anyone who is investing in these projects, since if we're investing in projects that have the capacity to deliver on resilience and adaptation, these projects will by nature behave better than others that do not, as we feel more and more the heat of climate change. Unless we have this track record, we won't have the financial institutions bringing these investments at more scale. So again, I think we are here like 20 years ago, investing in renewable energies and energy efficiency was something very esoteric. And today we have dedicated teams at the financial institutions doing project finance. And this is part of the bread and butter. What we hope is that with blended finance and doing all of these projects that we were mentioning and focusing more on the economic sectors that are closer to nature, like agriculture. We heard a lot about agribusiness and smallholder farmers. We will finally create this track record of projects, and we will be better at assessing the risk and the return of those projects. And this will become, hopefully, a new business line for the microfinance institutions, but also for the banks like BNP and others. That's my take.
Thanks. Any reaction from the private sector?
Yes, I can say a few words quite quickly. So obviously, the private sectors, there are things that we know how to do quite well, and there are things that we know less well. So we have been working, BNP Paribas has been working on inclusive finance for a few decades now, so something that we can do. But when it comes to really dealing with small farmers, local communities, we like relying on organization, on NGOs or local project developers that know these communities much better than we. And same thing when it comes to developing quite technical methodologies on climate change adaptation, biodiversity preservation in local areas. Same thing. We like working with more technical people than we are. And more globally, we're convinced that to tackle these issues seriously, we have to rely on blended finance to de-risk as much as possible in the beginning these projects that are otherwise quite difficult for us to address. And yes, to do blended finance, we need to work obviously with public institution. So that's why, all in all, it's very important for us to work with YAPU, to work with the JEF, to work with IFAD, because really it's a kind of project that we wouldn't be able to develop alone. And so, yeah, yes, the collective effort is very important for us.
Thanks a lot. I think we are getting on final remarks, because it is 3 and the conference is starting. If someone want to leave any final remark for the audience to wish a good beginning of the conference, I would like to tell to everyone that, of course, we have quite of other 5 to 6 other events on green inclusive finance and climate. So this is just the very beginning. So a clear path forward. Any addition from Jonathan, Jenny, or Julie before I conclude and wish to all a good...
If I just jump in, Davide, to thank the panel, and also to mention that from IFAD's side, there is a lot of insistence on the demand side development. You know, there's a lot on the supply side, and this is a new area. And of course, when we are developing all of the investment products, we should know that there should be some absorption capacity on the demand side. And the challenge on the demand side is targeting, and also access to markets that pay cost covering, prices. So as much as we are trying to target, green financing to investments, we want to be sure that from the smallholder angle, these investments will produce products that have a market. Otherwise, we will still be having a long time to go to actually convince ourselves that we will be investing in profitable business plans. Thank you, and over.
Thanks a lot. So I think is the moment to conclude, unless Julie, you want to add the last word.
Yes, maybe just thank you, David. Just a last word regarding what has been said about the public and sector coordination. So I think the project of the Institute that we will work on with the BNP and YAPU is a very good example of a place and a solution for more coordination between public and private sector. So that's and yes, and to steer the market development towards this climate change adaptation and biodiversity conservation.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Yeah, indeed, with this idea is really to try to get everyone together on the same table and to develop common solution. So I would please to have Char, can you please put me the PPT on the ground? Thanks a lot. So let me finalize by going full screen. So this is a call for joining for anyone that looks interested to build private-public partnership and market catalyzing market development together. So join the movement. You can reach us here at this email. This is an initiative that would like to be as open as possible. Yeah. So with all this, I would like to wish you a fantastic conference. We hope that this in beginning of the conference been inspiring and laying the ground so that you can think how climate will play a role in all the facets of the inclusive finance sector. We wish you all best. Let's start the conference. We will really look forward to build together ahead to get the private, public sector, and civil society, and specifically the one that needs the most. Yeah, because we also need to include them into all these struggle to find the solution. So the smallholder and rural community, a green resilience and inclusive finance for all. So with that, I think we are done and wish all the best for the conference.
Our next segment is coming up in 30 minutes. In the meantime, we invite you to network at the various exhibitors' booths and meeting lounges. Take advantage of this opportunity to connect with peers and make new contacts through the attendees list. See you in a bit.